Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured, but the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In his work On Tranquility, Plutarch observes that one of the ways in which people make themselves unhappy, unable to participate in that good state of mind that tranquility is that they don't focus on the good things that they actually have, at least for the time being. And he says that when we're in the midst of things that are happening that are contrary to our wishes or unwished for, entois abuletois symptomasi. So symptomasi are the things that just happen to fall out this way. And then abuletois means they're not the things that we really choose for ourselves. They're not the things that we really desire. They go contrary to what it is that we want. What should we be doing? He says that it's really important not to overlook what we actually have that's good, that's pleasant, that's attractive, as he's going to say, and that and I like this metaphor, mingling good with bad. We've got things that we think are bad, put the good in with them, and thereby the better is going to outshine the worse. Now, this is not an absolutely automatic process. It does depend to some extent on our own capacity to focus our attention, to pay attention to the good things, not overlook them. And this is a point that he's going to make many, many times. And he says that instead, what a lot of people do is they dwell on what's painful, lupera, right? And they force the mind to focus on disagreeable matters, the things that we don't really want to be focusing on. And he says it drags it by compulsion away from things that are better. So we focus instead on our troubles. And he says, what's wrong with you? He actually brings up a great line from a poet. Why do you look so sharp on others' ills, malignant man, yet overlook your own? He says you might adapt here the remark addressed to the meddlesome man. Why are you focusing on your own trouble? And continue to make it vivid and fresh in your mind, but you don't direct your thoughts to the good things that you actually have. Instead, you make yourself badly off like this wine merchant of Chios. Now, Chian wine is, at least in Plutarch's time, the best wine you can possibly have. So this guy is manufacturing and selling really, really good wine, and he sells it to other people. What does he eat at his table? Sour wine. The stuff that's maybe leftovers, not as good. You'd be like, what is wrong with you? You have the best stuff. You're actually making it for others. Why would you not serve it to yourself at the table? And he talks about one of his slaves being asked by the other what his master was doing, hunting bad when good was at hand. And he says, yeah, most people pass by the excellent and enjoyable conditions of their lot and focus on the things that are unpleasant and disagreeable. What's wrong with them? So he's going to propose an alternate model here, and he brings up this guy Aristippus. Now, Aristippus is a student of Socrates who was the founder of a hedonistic school of philosophy before the Epicureans called the Cyrenaic school. He taught his daughter, Arete, who taught her son, his grandson, the second Aristippus, and continued it that way. And he was a pretty easygoing guy. So here's the lesson. He's lost a estate, a farm, right? And he's got somebody who's coming to commiserate with him. And he says to the guy, "Why are you commiserating with me? Don't you just have a small bit of land and I have 3 farms remaining?" And the guy says, yeah, that's the case. And Aristippus says, "Well, I should be commiserating with you. I mean, I've still got 3 farms. You're the one who hardly has any property. So I'm way better off than you are. Why are you saying I should feel bad about this? Maybe I shouldn't." And so Plutarch is going to say, it's the act of a crazy person to be distressed at what's lost and not rejoice at what's saved. They're like little children throwing a tantrum. They've got a whole bunch of toys. You take away one toy and they're like, "I want that," and they don't focus on all the other toys that they still have in front of them. So his advice to us is going to be focus on what we actually do have. And he's going to give us a lot of interesting examples. Now, the first set of examples, there's 2 things I want to say about it. These are kind of commonplace things. And notice, here's the first thing, that you don't have to have them all, right? It's enough if you have one of them to be able to say, I've got something good. The other thing is these are all finite. These are all not the good as such, but just one particular thing. So he talks about reputation. You can have a good reputation if that matters to you. That's something that you can actually take pleasure in. Maybe it's, having a certain kind of status. Having a house, an oikos, right? Having a place to live, having a place that you call your own. That is something that even if you don't have good reputation, you could say, well, at least I got my place. Having a wife, gune in Greek, right? Being married to somebody who actually said yes to you and puts up with you and your nonsense. Even if you don't have a house, you're just a renter, right? Or you're traveling, at least you've got a companion, right? Or a good friend. Maybe you don't have a wife, but you do have a good friend. All of these are good things that if you're lucky enough to have in your life, you should actually view them as a source of happiness. Now notice what he says next. So he goes on and he says, we should not overlook common and ordinary things. And he brings up Antipater of Tarsus, a Stoic philosopher. On his deathbed, he's going over in his mind all the good things that he's enjoyed in his life. He doesn't omit a voyage that he took from Cilicia to Athens. That's in the past. He's not voyaging now. He's actually dying. And he's like, yeah, that was a great trip. That went really well. We could do this with like, oh man, I remember when I went to that concert and everything was going great, or that party, or whatever it happens to be, right? Past things like that. What a beautiful day it was. That one day back in autumn of 1983 or something along those lines. And he goes on and he talks about, even broader now, just being alive, being under the sun, not being dead is itself a good thing. And we, very often take that for granted, right? He also says that there's neither war nor factitious strife in our city, that we enjoy the earth, which allows us to engage in agriculture, the sea that allows us to sail on it. Again, things that we often just take for granted, and if they're not exactly the way that we want, we get all miffed about it. He's saying you're lucky that you have a place that you can grow things. You're lucky that you can travel the sea. And then he talks about certain freedoms that we have. We can speak or act or be silent or at leisure according to how we choose. Not everybody enjoys that. Some people are made to act. Think about, the fact that they lived in a slave society, or to speak. They don't get to be silent, right? This is all stuff that's good for us. And then he's going to suggest to us an interesting thought experiment that we can carry out to help us put these matters into better perspective. He says that, well, what if we imagine these things that we reckon as goods to be absent from our life? So, me paron ton auton, those things not being there. Phantasian lambanomen. So lambanai is a verb that gets used for a lot of like conceiving of things, assuming things, and fantasia is imagination. So in imagination, let's think about this. Let's conceive of not having these things. And he says, well, if we follow this thought process, we'll have certain realizations. Are these things only valuable when we're missing them? That's kind of stupid, isn't it? He says, just think about how sick people want health and peace, those at war, and to an unknown stranger in a city, the acquisition of reputation and friends, how painful it is to be deprived of these things. So, did they only have value when you take them away? That would be kind of ridiculous. Somehow they don't have value when you actually possess them? No, they have the same value. If you're bothered by the fact that they're lost, then you should be equally happy about the fact that you actually have them. And he says that, we shouldn't acquire these things as though they're of great worth and live in fear and trembling as though for things of great moment. And yet, while we have them, overlook them and despise or look down on them as having no value. If they really are valuable, how should we treat them? Well, here's the positive side. He says that we should make use of them, chrestai, in enjoyment, chairein, which could also be translated as being grateful, and entertainment, or we could translate this as well as relaxation or something like that, apalauen, right? We should be confident about them. So we should make good use of them while we have them. And he says, not possessing these things doesn't add any value that they didn't have in the past. We just have to be conscious of the value that they have. And this will help us too, by the way, that if we lose them, we'll be able to bear the loss without getting too upset, getting too riled up. He's going to close this set of ideas by talking about this guy, Arcesilaus, who is another member of Plato's Academy, but at a time when it had taken a skeptical turn. So there's several generations, actually many generations before Plutarch. And he says that Arcesilaus pointed this out. People examine the poems and the paintings and statues of other people, whether produced by other people or about other people, and they neglect their own lives. They don't pay the same attention to those, which has many subjects for contemplation. They look to external things to make them happy, and they admire the reputation and fortunes of others. And he says they do this like adulterers looking at other men's wives. So adulterers are people who, in many cases, have their own wives, and they're not content with them. They're looking at somebody else's, and they're like, oh man, she's so beautiful. If I could just have her. And what you should say to them is, you idiot, you got a wife right over there. You don't have to even go and buy her things and, woo her or do anything special. She's already here for you. What is wrong with you that you're not paying attention to what you already have? And he says that, people that are like that, they look down on their own stuff, on their own life, their possessions. They show contempt or despise it, literally kata phronontes, thinking downward on it. And so this showing contempt for what you have, not appreciating it, is another way we could say it, is going to make you unhappy. On the contrary, if you remind yourself of the good things that you do possess and get to enjoy, at least for the moment, you will enjoy tranquility as a result of that.